I see. Okay, nice. Caroline Lewis. Kamala. 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 Kamala what? Kamala? The last name again? Last name. Parkinson. Yeah, man. Sunday day. Okay, man. I am Miss Lewis. Miss Lewis. Caroline Lewis.
Hello, good morning. Vivian Gordon, Consultant Project Manager for the Cornwall Regional Hospital Rehabilitation Project.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Audit Clark, Program Manager for the HSSP program. Health Strengthening and Support Program.
Good morning. My name is Stacey Ann Steele. I am the Corporate Secretary Legal Officer for the Southeast Regional Health Authority.
Hi, morning everyone. The name is Sophia Moody Reed. I'm the Director of Finance at SARA.
Morning everyone. Roxanne Henlon, Senior Director of Public Procurement, SARA.
Good morning. I'm Errol Green.
Good morning everyone. Michelle Walker, Chief Internal Auditor. Good morning. All right. Good morning, everyone. Michelle Walker, Chief Internal Auditor, Minister of Health and Wellness.
Senior Auditor, Rochelle Bailey-Thomas, Senior Auditor, Kevin Wright, Senior Auditor, Hyacinth Williams, Principal Auditor, Kamala Parkinson, Senior Auditor, and Sandy Daly, Director of Audit. Thank you.
Ms. Blake, I hope your mic is working.
It is, sir. Morning, everyone. Hope Blake, Deputy Financial Secretary, Minister of Finance, and with me is Barrington Thomas, Senior Director.
three joining. I'm told that we seem to be having a technical difficulty with PBCJ and accessing that feed. In my opening remarks, there's been commentary in the public domain about the work of the Public Accounts Committee, and particularly the last meeting that we had 2 weeks ago, and matters that have been deemed to not be addressed by the committee. I want to indicate, first of all, that the Ministry of Health and Wellness provided a very detailed response to all the questions that were raised by the Auditor General. Sent to the committee 2 weeks ago. The matrix details the response of the ministry to a number of queries that were raised by the Auditor General. In some of the responses where the ministry accepts the Auditor General's finding and has taken steps to rectify the breach that would have been identified, some of those matters were not discussed by the committee. And I believe because some of those matters were not discussed in the meeting, there was a view that those matters were not dealt with. And so I want to just highlight two of those issues because I believe it is important for the public and those stakeholders who follow the Public Accounts Committee to note what those responses were. So for example, the absence of formal contracts for COVID expenditures totaling $129 million for infrastructural works. The response from the ministry, and I'm reading so that the records can capture it, the Ministry of Health and Wellness accepts this finding. The ministry wishes to highlight that this is not a usual practice for the ministry to not have in place formal contracts for infrastructure works. However, the exigencies of the COVID-19 pandemic required these works to be executed at a very short notice and within short time frames, which precluded the issuance of formal contracts for execution by the contractor. Notwithstanding the foregoing, it is to be noted importantly that formal requests for quotes were issued to these contractors outlining the bills of quantities and the performance requirements. Further, the contractors' letters of quotations and the ministry's acceptance thereof forms a binding contract between the ministry and the contractor as prescribed in the GOJ's standard bidding documents. This would provide the ministry with some recourse for poor or non-performance of the works. And we can have a discussion on it, but I just want to highlight that this response was provided. I'm just going to highlight one other in relation to the transfer of $174 million, which raises concerns about the effective use of COVID-19 funds. The response from the ministry will strengthen its internal emergency public procurement processes to ensure adherence to the Public Procurement Act and related guidelines, as well as the Financial, Administrative, and Audit Act and regulations. The ministry accepts this finding and will ensure in future that the requisite approvals are obtained by the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. Additionally, the ministry will take steps to recover from the Jamaica Red Cross funds spent on non-COVID-19 related activities. Upon a review of the information regarding the reporting of the cash donation to the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, the Ministry of Health accepts the breach of not reporting the $50 million cash donation to the Ministry of Finance promptly as required by the FAA Act. The Ministry of Health will ensure that all officers are resensitized regarding the reporting requirements for all donations in order to prevent any reoccurrence, and will ensure that all cash donations are accounted for and reported in a timely manner. The ministry wishes to clarify that the donation of US $200,000 was initially reported as a cash donation. It was later declared by the Spanish Jamaica Foundation that the $200,000 US was earmarked as a commitment by the foundation to pay for medical equipment and devices identified and procured by the National Health Fund. The $200,000 was later reclassified in the Health for Life Wellness Foundation project, reporting as an in-kind donation of equipment and not a cash donation. So I just want to ensure for those who follow the committee that the documentation, the matrix, which has an update from the Auditor General's Department with comments from the response from the ministry, that it is available to the public so that there is a full understanding that the issues, even though they were not verbally discussed by us, but they were responded to by the ministry when the responses came. Member Guy?
Thank you. You recall at the last meeting when we had gone past the time for the discussions, I indicated that I had some questions which would form part of this meeting here. Just for my clarity, PS, we have, what is the Marbella facility, the hotel?
So the Marbella facility is a facility that we leased for COVID, as a COVID quarantine facility. So it was a lease agreement that we entered into for a year for the provision of quarantine services.
So that would not necessarily be part of the contracts for rooms then? That's a different.
No, this was a different arrangement. It was a lease that we developed and signed through the National Land Agency. So the National Land Agency worked with us to execute that lease arrangement for COVID, the quarantine facility.
Could you say how much the lease was for the year?
Do you remember what the lease is for? I will have to get back to you on that figure, sir. I don't have that figure with me.
Why I ask is that I've seen here we have spent 3.6, and $13 million on the improvement to that facility to retrofit it to the requirements of the ministry. Just out of curiosity, how much, I wanted to know how much it would have cost us to lease this facility. You know?
I don't have that figure with me now.
But we could get it.
Sure, most definitely.
Good.
Just for completeness, PS, in terms of some issues that were outstanding, there was an expenditure on some TVs and tablets. Could you provide the committee with just an update on that?
Sure.
That was flagged as an issue.
Sure, no problem. So, for example, the Marabella facility. So the Marabella facility, as I said before, was leased. It was an old hotel. I think, what's the name of that hotel again? It's Five Finger Jack. I'm not remembering the trade name, the public name. Huh? Five Finger Jack Hotel. It's in Bull Bay. The hotel was leased as a quarantine facility. However, we recognized that in order to house persons in an isolated way in a quarantine facility, we had to provide basic amenities for their comfort, for individual comfort, because we were removing from persons their freedom of movement. And they had to stay in those rooms for sometimes up to 33 days in some instances. So we retrofitted the facility with not only television, but we had an arrangement with one of the cable companies for cabling of the facility with Wi-Fi as well as televisions. So we purchased the televisions to retrofit the rooms. Now there were two such facilities. One was the Marabella facility, but there was a facility that we operated owned by the Ministry of Health and Wellness, and operated as a quarantine facility in Kingston. Yeah. So those facilities, that's why we purchased the TV, because it would, in the discussions in the EOC at the time, it was felt that it would be inhumane to ask persons to, and remember at that time, during the course of the first phase of the epidemic, persons had to get the double negative to be discharged from quarantine. And so sometimes they would spend up to 6 weeks in quarantine. And it was felt at the time that as a humane issue that they should be provided with the requisite arrangements for their comfort. So as you know, internet is almost a utility now in terms of mainstay. And so we provided internet access, and we also provided cable, and the rooms did not have television, so we purchased televisions for the rooms.
Thank you. Can I ask you, Madam Auditor General, okay, 1 second. Go ahead, member.
Before you go, I think part of the concern of the AG in relation to that particular one, as well as others, based on slide 11, was that there was no proper inventory. Where are they now? Yes.
So those televisions are, so we took note, so there are 2 findings. One was the lack of rationale for the purchase of the TVs. I don't know if, anyway, we did provide a rationale for the purchase of the TVs, as I have just articulated now. However, the inventory, we took note of the fact that we were not putting into inventory, and so we accepted that finding, and those items have been placed in the inventory of the Ministry of Health and Wellness.
Thank you. Madam Auditor General, we didn't discuss some of these items. There were responses provided by the ministry where they accepted your finding, committed to rectifying the breaches. Are you satisfied with the actions that have been taken by the ministry in the matters that were just raised, that we didn't discuss at the last meeting?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have further issue.
No, that one is we're having a challenge, so we just have to work with the mics as best as possible.
Yes, I have no further issue subject to the response provided by the Ministry of Finance in its submission to the Public Accounts Committee, given that the ministry indicated that action would be taken to correct the issues going forward. As it pertains to the matters raised, 2 matters in relation to the lease, that is one which I was not aware of. And with respect to the television, the outstanding issue, as indicated in the report, as the permanent secretary alluded to just now, is that we were not aware of the rationale behind acquiring the television, but I know that the ministry indicated to us that steps would be taken to add them to the inventory. In terms of the whereabouts, I cannot speak to that because information has been shared here that I previously had no knowledge of.
Okay, thank you. I would just, before I close and go to the confirmation, again, just for the general public and those who take a keen interest in the PAC, there are many issues that arise, generally where the MDA accepts the findings, takes steps to address the findings and rectify them. We don't necessarily go into a long discussion on the matter. We spent most of the last meeting dealing with one issue, which there was a difference of opinion on that matter. But just to reiterate that the issues are still dealt with, the documentation on the responses are here, they're tabled in the Parliament, so that if the public wants to view them, they can. And I don't want the impression to be given that the issues that were raised by the Auditor General were not addressed and responded to. Can I ask for, moving to item 5, a confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on April 18th? Member Miller? Member Miller moved. Member Guy? Oh, you can't? Member Clark? You have had a chance to look at it? You want us to defer it then? All right, let's defer it. And matters arising. Madam Hoblake, I'm going to ask you, there are some matters which came up at the last meeting, and you have provided two sets of responses. One came last night. I'm going to ask you to take us through that, and I'm told that another one was just sent to us literally just a few minutes ago. So if you could take us through those responses from the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, specific questions were asked of the Ministry, and the response is as given. So you want me to go through all the...
You can probably provide a summary. It doesn't
Okay.
have to be a word by word.
Okay.
But there were critical issues that were raised, and it's important that the committee gets that response.
All right, so I'm going to leave out question 1 because the Auditor General had provided a status of the appropriations accounts, so I'm going to leave out that one. One of the other questions was the status of the financial management system. And just to note that the financial management system was replaced in 2018 by the government financial management system, and the FinMan system is only used for statements, to present statements for the financial year 2018-19 and prior to 2018-19. Based on our records, the only ministry that has recently said that they have an issue with the FinMan is the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. Regarding legislative provisions...
Might I interrupt, Ms. Blake?
Sure.
Ms. Blake, you said current. The ministry came here and said that part of the reason why the appropriations, the accounts were not completed was that they had problems with the FinMan system. The PAC asked on that basis if there was a report to the Ministry of Finance as to whether the FinMan system was done for other ministries as well. What you're giving us here today is a current thing. We need a retrospective answer as to was it done at these particular times.
Thank you, Member. We would need a little more time. Our records are not showing any reports in that regard, but we are in consultation with the Accountant General, who also works on the system, so we'll get that information to you at a later date. The matter of legislative provision, which states that the Financial Secretary may take disciplinary action against a permanent secretary. Just want to state, correct, that the legislation does not prescribe penalties for the accounting officer in respect of submission of financial statements. Consideration is being given to including in the Financial Administration and Audit Act financial instructions a method of tracking the responsible officer's performance related to submission of financial statements, and that would have to be agreed in terms of a work plan. However, I'd love to point out Regulation 71 of the Financial Management Regulation, which states that accounting officers, principal receivers of revenue, and accountable officials shall take appropriate disciplinary proceedings in accordance with the public service regulations against officers responsible for the delay in the timely submission of financial statements. Action shall be immediately reported to the Auditor General and the Financial Secretary. And 3 says the Financial Secretary shall report to the Minister any accounting officer or principal receiver of revenue whose financial statements are consistently late in submission and are in arrears. A report under paragraph 3 of the regulation shall include recommendations for measures to be taken to ensure compliance. So that is as much as it says. We also were asked to look at the process for the verification and approval of the appropriations account. I think some of that was discussed in the meeting. Just to note that the deadlines for the submission of financial statements, annual financial statements 4 months following the end of the financial year, quarterly financial statements within 14 working days of the subsequent quarter, and monthly financial statements within 14 working days of the subsequent month. We were also asked to provide clarity regarding the law that applies to the compliance the engagement of hotels for COVID-19 in terms of the purchase order and to explain the exemption from the Procurement Act. Now, in the context of the meeting that was held April 18, the purchase order was used for hotel accommodation. So just to state very clearly that there is an exemption, there is an exclusion in the first schedule of the Act for hotel accommodation. However, in terms of the exemption, we just want to note, for the avoidance of doubt, that the exemption from the Public Procurement Act 2015 applies to travel services and hotel accommodations or facilities and is meant to relieve procuring entity from its obligation to follow the procurement methods and the system of approval of procurement contracts set out in the Act. These procuring entities are therefore expected to comply with obligations, with the other obligations of the Act, including the objectives set out in Section 5 of the Act, and we have attached that, which has to do with value for money, etc. Procuring entities also remain open to liability should they undertake any action impugned by the Act, such as set out in Sections 26 and Sections 54 to 59.
And I just received another document from you.
Right.
Your position on the use of purchase orders as contracts. Can you just go through that as well?
Okay. Answering the question, if it is a breach of Government of Jamaica procurement policy for a procuring entity to establish a contract with a supplier by way of purchase orders. So these are general procurement guidelines now. And ordinarily, procuring entities are expected to establish formal contractual relationships with suppliers by way of contract documents containing the terms and conditions set out in those contracts, incorporated into the standard bidding documents issued by way of Circular Number 24, April 2, 2019. Where those contract forms are inadequate, inappropriate, or otherwise unsuitable, procuring entities may substitute the forms entirely for industry forms such as FIDIC and JIC, or they may make such adjustments as are necessary to properly establish the parties' obligations. In every event, it is expected that a contract between the Government of Jamaica and a private supplier is to be made by way of a written contract document that is duly executed by all parties and placed on the procurement record. This ensures that in the event of a dispute regarding contractual obligations of the parties, the executed contract document may be admitted as evidence in any court proceedings. And this, of course, minimizes the Government of Jamaica's legal risk. Jumping to 5, it is understood that a procuring entity may determine from time to time that there are no or limited supply risks inherent to a particular contractual relationship and may therefore form contracts by way of purchase order. It is our view, however, that procuring entities are not invested with such extensive agency and without prior authorization may not take such a risk in these circumstances. Based on Regulation 53 of the Financial Management Regulations, where a service is undertaken by a department, the price and other terms and conditions of the service shall be clearly understood and agreed upon prior to implementation, and B, it should be in writing. Circular 36 provides the procedures to follow when preparing a purchase order, and included in the circular are the basic requirements when preparing a purchase order. That's it, Ms.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. I'm not going to ask Madam AG because you wouldn't have seen this, but at a later date, because this issue may arise again in future emergencies that we may have, just so that we are consistent and that I'd love your opinion on it at a later date, based on what the Ministry of Finance has said. Members, any questions based on the response from the Ministry of Finance? Okay. PS, I had asked some questions at the end of the last meeting related to the status of arrears to providers of services at the Ministry of Health, which would include your regional health authorities, plus also the status of contracts with providers who are providing services, janitorial, security, and other services. Could you provide an update on that, please?
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. So we have prepared and we have submitted to the committee the statement of the different contractual obligations and our 90-day forgive me, sir, just give me a second. I seem to have lost my file. So we did prepare and submit to Parliament the statement from the 90-day and as well as our security contracts. So if I may go through the submission for the 90 days in the first instance. I'm having some technical issues, just a moment, please. So in terms of our arrears for 90 days for the Southeast Regional Health Authority, those arrears represent $181 million up to 90 days. For the Northeast Regional Health Authority, there is an arrears stock of $1.8 million over 90 days. And for the Western Regional Health Authority, there is an arrears stock of $33,953,000. And for Southern Region, there are no arrears over 90 days. The total stock of arrears, therefore, within the regional health authorities is $217 million and $217 million approximately.
Could I ask, I think your principal financial officer is here, what figure is that coming from 6 months ago, 9 months ago? Because I do recall the Minister of Finance indicating that allocations were made in the budget to deal with those arrears.
So we are
Chair,
coming...
Before Pierce answers.
Wait, 1 second. Member Guy? Yeah?
Yes. We're not dealing all apples here. Sarah has a total liability of 181. Current 30 to 60, 61 to 90, over 90. NERA just has over 90. Western Regional Health Authority, this one seemed to be current with all 90 and over. We see inconsistencies here, unlike Southern Region and SERA, which gives us for the 4 periods, but the other 2 just indicate over 90. Can we get the correct amount for those that are total?
So if I may, Chairman, so I take that point, and that's a correct point from the member. So the over 90 is what was asked for at the meeting, and we can reflect on the minutes of the meeting. The request was for us to provide over 90. So in truth and in fact, my reporting just now, Sir Chair, was off. For Sarah, the over 90 is $92 million. However, there is a payment that is in dispute at this point in time, and we are trying to resolve that payment. That will increase once it is resolved in terms of its actual liability status. It will increase to over 90 provision.
And so that would represent, from my recollection, a significant reduction in their arrears, because my recollection when this matter came up maybe a year ago it was in the billions, huh?
Right.
No? Or hundreds of millions?
We are coming from not last year, the financial year before that, of a arrear stock of about $2.7 billion over 90 days. And I must commend the regional health authorities, especially the directors of finance and the regional directors in the authorities. We sat as a team and we worked through the challenges. Some of the challenges are historic in terms of the fact that we had a lot of invoices that could not be validated because either the officer that initiated the payment was no longer a member of the team or the different issues. And we consulted the Ministry of Finance, and they allowed us to utilize a process. What's the name of the process again? The honor certificate. And so we introduced the honor certificates to resolve quite a number of the transactions that were outstanding in the Regional Health Authority. That puts us in this position that we can report today that we have reduced our arrears stock by some 90-odd%.
What percentage of the total, the ministry's budget, is spent through the regional health authorities?
Yeah, 81%.
Okay. So the figures you presented would represent the bulk of the arrears. The central ministry itself would not have significant arrears separate from this.
No, we don't carry arrears in the central ministry in the same way that the regional health authorities carry arrears, because we manage using cash-based accounting, and the management of arrears looks different in cash-based accounting than accrual accounting, which is what the regions utilize as their accounting principle.
All right, could you go to the other one related to the contracts for security and provision of other services, and whether adjustments have been made to deal with the minimum wage award from 2022?
All right. So, thank you, Chairman. So, we received from the regional health authorities the different contracts, and every region, and I must explain that every regional health authority is a public body with their own autonomy and their own board. So, every regional health authority in their public body status is able to enter into contractual arrangements independent of the center and independent of the regions themselves. So, for example, Chairman, we provided the full report from all regions, and you'll see from the report that in some regions we have arrangements with several suppliers of security services, and while in other regions different modus of providing security services are done, and so the arrangement looks different. So right now, for example, I will just use as an example, sir, if I would be allowed, the Southeast Regional Health Authority that has a total of 5 contracts with 5 security firms for some $1.7 billion in its entirety. The smallest contract being for $193 million, the largest contract being for $436 million. Now, the status of the minimum wage negotiations are ongoing. Some firms we have settled with across the different regional health authorities. The settlement price is looking somewhere from as low as 32% increase in the value of the contract to a high of 49% in the value of the contract, given the...
Just for clarity, we're talking about the minimum wage from 2022.
Oh, no, I'm talking about the instructions coming from the Ministry of Finance for the new...
So this would include both minimum wage and removing guards who were formally classified as contractors to being employees?
No, just the latter. Just the latter.
Oh, just the latter?
Just the latter. So
okay.
the variation in the contracts for the latter being the changing status of guards, the employment status of guards. That arrangement is what we are implementing in terms of negotiation. Now, the minimum wage negotiations, we have settled with about 50% of the firms, and they have made their submissions to what that minimum wage adjustment means in terms of our arrears with them and how much money we need to pay over to them to adjust for those movements in the daily rates for guards.
So just to be clear, so the figure you would have quoted between 30 to 40% just represents what arises from the court ruling.
Yes.
What I would like to know, when you add the 2022 minimum wage increase, what that would account for, and if when you factor in the new minimum wage increase, which is effective, well, for security guards it's April 1st gone, but for general public it would be July, what would that push the budget to in terms of a percentage increase?
So I would not be able to give you that right now because we have not completed all the negotiations with all the companies, with all the regions. So that we intend to complete by the end of June. And then we will make a submission to the Ministry of Finance for the additional funds to be included in the supplementary estimates because they were not included in the budget for this year. As you'd appreciate, Chairman, the budget was settled in November of last year when a lot of these parameters were not at that time known. And so what we are here talking to now is what we will be asking the Ministry of Finance for in the supplementary estimate. So at this point in time, Chairman, I would not be able to give you a complete figure, but based on the instructions coming from the Ministry of Finance, we understand and appreciate that this will be a matter that can be settled locally and we would not have to go through the approvals for the amendment of the contract because the variation is a function of rate change and not necessarily an increase in the scope of the project. That's the instructions that we were provided by through the Ministry of Finance. And the
All right, so let me come back to I'm particularly concerned about the minimum wage issue because we get the complaints from those employees that they're still earning below legally the $9,000 because the companies they're contracted to have indicated that no adjustment has been made. So you're saying 50% of those companies you have settled the issues with and you intend to complete the rest, you said by the end of June?
By the end of June. As a team, myself and the regional directors looked at the overall strategy and we looked at the different parameters. We were considering trying to do the negotiations en bloc as a health team, but given the nature of the different contracts, we decided against that. And so each individual regional health authority is negotiating on their own, and then we will consolidate in head office and make the submission to the Ministry of Finance for consideration in supplementary estimates.
Let me ask, just in terms from a negotiating perspective, while I accept the autonomy of the regional health authorities, is that the most effective way for government, given that, particularly on the security side, you tend to be dealing with maybe 5 to 10 firms, whether you are in southeast, northeast, western, wherever. Is there not scope, well, let me ask you, is there scope for negotiations to be more centralized so that you can benefit from scale, given that they are the same companies that we're dealing with across the board?
That was a very active discussion that we had at our recent meeting. And what we found was that different regions have different characteristics. And different characteristics in the health facilities require them to negotiate in a different way. So for example, Southeast region, the largest region, has the bulk of its hospitals. And the type of security arrangements that we need for Southeast looks completely different from what we need in Northeast. Because their socioeconomic dynamics in their hospital facilities is not the same. And so what you need for security at KPH might not be the same as what you need at St. Anne's Bay. And when we look across the different facilities and across the different services provided, it did not, when we weigh the pros and cons of negotiated en bloc versus negotiating from a decentralized position, we recognize that it was not more, there was no more efficacy gained from negotiating in the different groups.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
To the liabilities.
Sure.
P.S., could you say whether the 8.2 million that is over 90 days for the Western, as well as any component of the 181 million for Sarah, is any of these amounts, or does any of these amounts reflect any monies owing to licensing for the Linux systems at St. Joseph's, which is in Sarah, and the Cancer Treatment Center at Cornwall Regional, because they have been out. The units have been out for the past 3 to 4 months. And we see here where there's a 8.2 million owed by Western Region for maintenance, repairs of medical machinery. Sarah didn't identify in any explicit way what they were owing for. Can you tell us whether these have been impacted, non-payment, with what is happening there?
So thank you very much for that question, member. No, none of those. So what we did last year was that we established a maintenance agreement with Varian, which is the supplier for the Linac machines. And that maintenance agreement encapsulates all of the different components. So the licensing for the software, the provision of routine maintenance services, troubleshooting, the maintenance of the entire system. We do accept that about 2 months ago, there was an issue with the software where there was a reported incompatibility of the software with the solution. We had to acquire new licenses, and we had to acquire a new server, and all of these were provided under the maintenance agreement by Varian. The issues that we faced, that why the machine was down for about a month or two, related to issues on our side in terms of acquiring the particular server that was necessary, and then some technical issues with loading the software on the server that was bought. The technician came twice to country, and the matter is now resolved, and the two machines are now back in operation. We do understand that it has impacted service delivery significantly, and quite a number of patients would have been impacted by the downtime. What we did, however, was to utilize the outsourcing of the third Linac in country, which is ROCJ, which is radiological. All right, let me not. ROCJ. And they provided backstop for us in terms of providing those services to patients suffering from or impacted by cancer.
Yes, just one final question on this, Chairman, if you may. What is our protection from cyber attacks as it relates to these machinery?
So that's a question that I can answer from the Ministry of Health in terms of our Information Systems for Health program that we are implementing, and the fact that we have established a data center at eGov to house and as a repository all of our servers, and to utilize the protection systems for the servers at the data center at eGov. However, the larger conversation happens for government, and we are seeing, and we got a report recently from the Cybercrimes Unit as well as the Ministry of Science, Technology, Energy, and Technology.
MSET, yeah.
Right. And we note that there has been an increase in terms of attack on our solutions. However, our software protection systems have held up to those attacks, and we have not seen a breach in the center. I do know that, and it is in the public domain, that there was an attack on the systems at the Southeast Regional Health Authority. However, they have moved to manage the risk, and they have been able to bring up back their email system, which was attacked.
Do you have the cybersecurity resources within the ministry, or you depend primarily on the CERT, which is run from MSET?
Both. We have heavy backstopping from CERT, but we are building out capacity in the Ministry of Health and Wellness. We have recently received positions in the ministry for the support of our Information Systems for Health branch of the policy division of the ministry, because a large amount of investments are currently taking place in the build-out of ICT and other solutions for delivery of healthcare. So we are mindful of that, and we are implementing the different strategies to achieve that.
Thank you. Members, any questions before we move on to the substantive item for today? All right, the substantive item for today relates to the performance audit, the effectiveness of Jamaica's institutional framework in enabling a strong and resilient national public health system. I also just want to state for the record the documents which have been tabled today. Some of them came late last night and some of them were just sent to us electronically. They are the responses to the Public Accounts Committee from the Ministry of Finance. There were 2 documents which were sent to us. The aging report for the regions for over 90 days for 2022-2023, the status of the security contracts for the regional health authorities. Those documents just came to us, so I just want to alert members, not all of them have been printed, but some of them have been circulated, the ones which came late. I want to go to now the substantive document here. One of the themes which runs through this report, PS, is that the estimates done by the Ministry of Health, both for infrastructure work and also for identifying equipment needs, seems to be deficient, meaning that in a number of instances, in at least 3 that I can identify, we as a country borrowed money from multilateral agencies for specific amounts based on estimates which would have been prepared initially, and then we have had to go back to those agencies to revise these numbers, and the revisions are not normally in the magnitude of 5 or 10%. We're talking about, in one case, a project which moved from 87.1, no, sorry, the project was increased by 87.1 million from the initial estimate of 61.4 to a total of 148 million. So we're talking about a magnitude of over 100% increase. And I've seen that in 3 cases, and it's important for me to understand why seemingly we would have been so way off in these estimates in the first instance, and what is it that the ministry is doing to either develop the capacity or ensure it can acquire the capacity to accurately estimate its needs in a manner which doesn't have us having to go back to agencies to borrow more money.
All right, thank you very much. I just want to make one clarification, Chairman. It's not that we are borrowing more money. It's an increase in the government of Jamaica contribution to the project. So the loan amount remains at $50 million. There is no additional amount that has been borrowed to. So to answer your question directly then, Chairman, so when the project was first contemplated in around 2016-17, thereabout, there was a report that was produced by an organization called UNOPS, and that document was utilized, that used high-level estimates, was utilized to look at the...
Yes, can you tell us what are those? What are high-level estimates?
So what the methodology that UNOPS did was to use a rate by square foot and then determine the estimate of what it would cost to do the necessary adjustments to the health facility. And so that high-level estimate was used on 5 hospitals in total. I believe the 5 were Spanish Town, Maypen, St. Anne's Bay, KPH, and Mandeville Regional Hospital. From that report, the negotiations with the Inter-American Development Bank took place, and the high-level estimates were used. However, as part of the project design, it was known that you now have to go and refine those estimates. And so in the project, it was under component one of the project, the acquisition of a design firm was part of the project implementation process. And the scope of work for the design firm was to complete the final design work and to arrive at a bills of quantity, or BQ. Now, the bills of quantity is that instrument in construction that gives you the true cost of what an investment would take place. Now, that is one aspect of why we have the change. Now, during the time of 2017 to when the design firm was doing its work, 3 documents were finalized in the Ministry of Health and Wellness. The first document was the secondary care model. The second document was the document relating to hospital standards. And the third document was our smart hospital, our smart health facility document. Those 3 documents then informed what the standards were for health facilities going forward. And so what we had to do was to provide these documents to the technical firm that was doing the design. And the technical firm would then utilize these these refined standards to determine what the specifications for the building was, and then from there build out the BQ. The third issue that resulted in the change is that when you do high-level estimates, the high-level estimates don't take into consideration necessarily the particular environment in which you are constructing the facility. So there had to be some studies that have to be undertaken. One of them is the geotechnical studies, the surveys. And the geotechnical surveys would now look at the soil and the soil quality and all of those things. And those types of surveys will inform you on your foundation and what type of foundation you need to build, and all sort of different standards that you'd have to utilize in arriving at the bills of quantity. All of those elements from 2017 coming up to now resulted in significant increases in the cost of the building. Now, at the management level, at the executive management level, the COO, myself, the chief technical director, etc., looked to it, and we made a value judgment. Do we build according to the envelope of funds that we have, or do we go and look at what is the right thing to build based on these standards that we have? And what is the conversation that we have with the policy directorate around the way forward? Our position in the Ministry of Health and Wellness at its executive management is that we should build the right facility for the environment that we live in. Because we understand the advent of NCDs, we understand where the health system is going in terms of the response to NCD and the epidemic of NCDs within the country, and the fact that we now need to provide in our facilities a set of standards for service delivery that require that we build space that is appropriate and fit for purpose. So what we did was to say to the policy directorate, let us build better. Let us build infrastructure that responds to these issues that we see coming in the next 10, 20 years. Let's not build because we have an envelope of $50 million. Let's construct it in a very proactive way. Based on that discussion among the executive, we sold the argument to the Ministry of Finance. And our argument to the Ministry of Finance is that the investment in health is worth it. The investment in health is worth it because based on these standards that we have defined, we believe that we need to move health in a way that responds to the heart attacks, the strokes, all of the different conditions coming out of the epidemic of NCDs that we saw. The Ministry of Finance agreed with us, and from there we were able to increase and expand the project by about $100 million. I think, to me, from a risk management perspective, the management of the risk of providing health resources in that way, or health services in that way, is a valid argument for the expenditure. Whether or not we need to be a little more astute in our design of projects, I would say yes. I think there are some valuable lessons that we learned in this particular project. And I would accept the findings in the report that we should strengthen our public investment management system in the Ministry of Health and Wellness, which we have started to do in the restructuring of our policy branch to have a specific function dealing with design of projects.
Before I invite Member Sibley's, to what extent do you have the technical resources within the ministry? Huh? Right. Yeah. After this. Yeah. The technical resource, because the ministry and the regional health authorities own a lot of infrastructure, and on an ongoing basis, you either have to upgrade, build new, etc. So, to what extent do you have the internal technical resources to ensure that estimates are properly done, or is that generally outsourced to a third party who would act on your behalf to protect the interests of the ministry?
So we don't have enough of the resources. And the truth of the matter is that we thank the recent wage adjustments that have been made, the restructuring of the compensation. No, we're saying we're thankful for the recent.
You can go to places in your constituency and you can sing that song on a particular road. Go ahead, Pierce.
No, I'm just saying that from where we're seated in the Ministry of Health, we can't compete for the type of resources that we want. Right now, what's the capital budget again? What's the capital budget? So the capital budget in the Ministry of Health and Wellness is $6.4 billion just for this year. When we look at all the investments that we want to do at UA, Cornwall, Spanish Town, St. Anne's Bay, Maypen, all the health facilities that are going to be, it's a total investment of some $90 billion over 3 years. We don't have the internal capacity right now, and we can't compete for the type of persons with the private sector. And as you can see, the construction industry is having its own heyday. The reality, though, is that we have to innovate. And what we have done is that we have built purpose-built project units. So we have the purpose-built project unit for the HSSP and for the Cornwall Regional Hospital. And what we did was to utilize different contracting methods to acquire the skills that we need to implement these massive projects. And so we have to innovate given the restrictions and the constraints that we have, the strictures and the constraints that we have in implementation, and work through the implementation process.
All right, Member Sibley's, those mics aren't working, so use the one to your left. To your left. To your left? That one. Yeah.
P.S. I just want to go back to the question that the chairman asked, and to your answer, which was very lengthy. I just want to see if I understand what you had said. So you are saying this gap of 87 million is really caused not by time as so much as there was a change of scope, one, and that you had made this representation to the Ministry of Finance and they concurred, and also that the way it was done by the entity that did it in the first instance was not similar to how the persons in the construction industry did it when they were looking at the DQ?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I want to come back to the acknowledging the challenges that you have in terms of competing with the private sector and recognizing that there would have been lessons learned from previous experiences. We still seem to be having challenges in coming up with accurate estimates for a number of your major infrastructure projects. And you have acknowledged that you're going to be spending 90 billion over a 3-year period. The one which comes to mind is the Cornwall Regional Hospital. And from what I can see without knowing details, we seem to be dealing with a moving target in terms of what the real estimate of rehabilitating that institution is. Can you give us a current update now as to where we are at, and what does the ministry estimate it will cost taxpayers to get the hospital to the standard that you are projected?
All right, thank you very much, Chairman. You're putting me in a very, very difficult position because my minister makes his sectoral tomorrow. But I will answer. No, I will answer, sir. The Cornwall Regional Hospital in 2018, 2019, we had a conversation in the ministry around how do we treat with the facility and the rehabilitation and the renovation of the facility. And it was decided in the executive management of the ministry that we would phase the project because there were some unknowns. There were a lot of unknowns with the building because it's a brownfield site, meaning that there was an existing building. There's an existing building there, which is different from a greenfield site where you're building from scratch. Because it was a brownfield site, there was a lot of unknowns in terms of what was behind the concrete in the wall. But there was an obvious understanding that you needed to insulate the building. So what we decided to do was to phase the project into 3 phases. And phase 1 would look at the roof and fixing the roof. That was completed. Phase 2, however, we had to now do in a 2A and 2B, which was the gutting of the building and discarding of the material. And then we had to do some infrastructure work. Every phase of that, new things arose from, as you know, with every brownfield site. So once you hit the wall and you began to see the beams and you saw this spalling, that was happening in the building, the price of the renovation changed. And then when we went into the basement of the building and the water infiltration and the impact of that water infiltration on the foundation of the building, that had to be addressed as well. So because it's a brownfield site, there was always this as your words, this moving target around cost. Once we completed phase 1 and phase 2, there was a clear understanding of what was needed now to be done to rehabilitate the building, because we now knew and we've remediated all of the issues that impacted the infrastructure of the building. The straightening of the core of the building, the foundation, the rehabilitation of the foundation, the remediation of the rust that was taken, the removal of hazardous material from the building. All of those things were done in phase 1 and 2. Now we're at phase 3. In phase 3 was determined that we needed to have 2 works done in 1. So we went to Cabinet and we got an approval from Cabinet to utilize a design and build model for phase 3. And the design and build model says that the same firm that you utilize to design the final stage would then implement whatever was designed. And we looked at all of the risk factors around the design and build model, and those risk factors we tried to mitigate by attaching to the project a lot of quality assurance functions. And so there was a commissioning agent that was contracted in the form of WSP out of Washington. There was a firm, there were the usual technical firms that were utilized, architectural firms, etc., that were utilized to surround the design of the building. What we have now is a final number for the design and build module. And I think that number sounds something, and I don't want to necessarily articulate the number, but can I just give you a broad number, and that is sufficient because the procurement process is not yet concluded. It is penultimate, but it is not yet concluded. So it's around $14 billion.
Let me ask you, do these contracts build in an escalation clause that would take into account movement in, for example, steel prices and other equipment that would be outside of your control?
Yes, I'm being advised technically, yes, it is included in that price. So the $14 billion is the design and build phase 3 cost. And that is what is now being reflected in the estimates for us moving forward.
And your anticipation would be that that figure would remain roughly that, outside of issues which are outside your control, like movement in raw material prices.
Yeah. So as you are aware, Chairman, the construction environment is dynamic, and there are several things that can impact a project. I am coming from my own background in social work, case management. The socioeconomic environment is tense in that community, and those things can impact project and project pricing. There are several, as I said before, several other issues that, so I wouldn't want to sit here and tell you, yes, this is it, and we'll never have any variations, because I can't give that guarantee because of the dynamic nature of the environment that we're in.
Member Guy?
I'm going to go back a little to come to the argument. You indicated that in terms of the first set of questions relating to cost overruns, not at Cornwall, but in terms of ministry's budgeting, was that you had utilized UNOPS estimate. Is it the same UNOPS that was contracted for Cornwall Regional in 2017?
Yes, it was. It was the same UNOPS.
You further went on to say that a decision was taken in 2019 as to how Cornwall Regional would progress. Would you care to say when was it found out that the costs to rehabilitate Cornwall Regional went outside of what would have been presented in that yellow book that we get estimates of expenditure each year from the Finance Ministry, which includes sections for the Ministry of Health? Because you did indicate just a while ago that a decision was taken by senior management in 2019.
So, right. So the decision that was made in 2019 reflected the information that we had at the time. So what was provided in the estimates of expenditure was the information that we had at the time for what the cost of the project was. However, our current understanding, and this was, our estimate was arrived at in November of the last year. And that was reflected in the new estimates of expenditure as was tabled recently tabled and passed in the House.
But P.S., you would appreciate that the estimates that came and tabled in the House and passed in March was much less than the 14 billion that the project managers just indicated that it might come around to at the end.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind that if you look and interrogate that book, you will see that it gives years, not only the current year, but the estimates for next year and the following year. Why is it now that we are seeing a different figure? If you, in November of last year, your team came to a total quantification of the amount at 10, I think it was 10.5 billion and approved in for 22-23 as a total, 23-24 as a total cost for rehab of Cornwall. Why is that another $4 billion has been tagged on?
So, Chairman, through you, Chairman, member, you will agree with me that as you move through the procurement process, there are certain information that you cannot finalize until the procurement process is concluded or near to be concluded. So at the point in time that we provided the $10 billion, there was a understanding, and the best information in the ministry at the time was that that was the cost of the project. However, based on the agreement with Cabinet and based on the use of the design and build model, we entered into a procurement process that has now arrived at a different price point based on the information from this contractor themselves. And so where we are in the procurement process now has given us this price, which is an intimation of what the settled contract will look like at the end of the procurement process.
Yes, please, sorry for belaboring this particular point, but you said that based on what the contractor gave you, has that figure been interrogated by your technical team to say that it is value for money, or these people are ripping the government off, or something like that? It cannot be that the contractor has given us a price, and that is the price that we are going to settle. Probably you misspoke, but I mean, the truth is that based on your argument, it would mean that your contractor has given you a price which the ministry might not be minded to accept, but because the contractor says so, this is what we are accepting.
So Chairman, through you to the member, no. So what the process looks like is that we have a purpose-built team that looked at the submission from the firm. However, we did contract an independent review firm to look at the estimates, because we understood that we didn't have all the knowledge sets internal in the ministry. And so that independent body evaluated what the design firm submitted, and it is the assessment it's the assessment of the independent firm that we are working with in terms of arriving at our assessment that would now go to the other stages of the procurement process. So no, we are not utilizing just what the design firm has submitted, but we are running a process of peer review and assessment.
You will recall, the Minister and Mr. Vivian will tell you that 2 years ago I said it would cost 10. So
I know.
I need to work.
You know, I don't get into these forays because I'm a civil servant. Yeah, I know.
Said it.
I know. Yes, sir.
All right, Madam Auditor General, any comments on your report and responses?
No, Mr. Chairman, nothing that has been mentioned so far.
Okay. Could you, just for my purposes, if you could give us an idea of the projected time frame for completion of the major projects? I know and I'm talking about your infrastructure projects now. I know there's UWI is on the books, Spanish Town, and Cornwall Regional. Right. So the public has an expectation about when those things would be done.
Chairman, you'd forgive me, I don't have those timelines with me. I can provide it to the... Huh?
It's in the budget presentation. All right. Yeah, yes, Member Guy.
Chairman, may I move on to, there are two other concerns that I want to look at with the AG department looked at, and that is and I looked at the management response as well about the Central Health Committee and their meetings to advise the ministry, and there was a variance with what the Audit General Department saw and the response of the ministry. And I can appreciate that the Audit General Department and the team would be guided by presentation of documentation about minutes and or lack thereof. P.S., can you give us a fair idea of what transpired there and why this became a concern of the Auditor General in that there were no minutes of meetings held and all the others that she has indicated in her report?
Thank you very much for the question. Through you, Chairman. Let me first say that this report from the Auditor General, the management team reviewed in its entirety, and it provided a lot of guidance to the ministry, and a lot of things from this report we recognize we weren't paying close attention to, and that we needed to kind of, and from the governance perspective, change and improve. I think the assessment of the Chief Medical Officer was that this was a very good report, and I think that represents the opinion of the management of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, because we appreciated the methodology and the use of the international benchmark and our assessment against that international benchmark. And we also appreciated the guidance and the recommendations coming from this report, and the fact that we could walk away from the discussions on this report with a mandate to adjust and change some of the operations within the Ministry of Health and Wellness. So I just want to precede my the response of the management, because I'm going to ask the Chief Medical Officer to respond to that question, Member Guy, in its entirety, because it's fascinating what we found from that. I think part of the conversation is that this entire issue of the what do you call it, the Central Health Committee predates even emancipation, and so I turn over to.
Could I also ask to prevent the CMO from doing a double presentation? Speak to the lessons learned from Zikvi and chikungunya as well, because that came as part of the concern.
So I will turn over to kind of give us a sort of historical lesson and then talk to what we'll be doing in terms of strengthening the governance systems in health.
Thank you for this opportunity to respond to the question. And certainly I want to say, as the PS has said, that we do appreciate the report. I think that it is very timely, coming out on the downside of the pandemic, for us to look at how we address some of the things that the gaps were found in our operations. The Central Health Committee is a very interesting point raised in the report. The statement that the non-performance of the Central Health Committee has impaired the effectiveness of the Public Health Act. We do have some concerns where that statement was made. The Central Health Committee really dates back to the Central Board of Health that was established in 1851. And the Central Board of Health at that time, essentially, if we look at it, would have been the Ministry of Health, because it reported directly into the House of Assembly, to the governor. And the Central Board of Health had tremendous power and authority, and had the authority to make rules and regulations. Since then, however, there has been a lot of significant change, because essentially the Central Board of Health at that time was the main advisor to the government on public health matters. in the early 1900s, the Central Board of Health would have been downgraded to a Central Health Committee, and a lot of those powers were taken away, and it now just became an advisory body to the minister. And some of the authorities that were vested in the Central Board of Health were actually now put in the local Board of Health. When we gained independence, we would have gone to a House of Representative system, parliamentary system, and the formation of the Ministry of Health, which now would have taken on that role, that major role of advising the Minister of Health and the government. And through the Technical Services Division, headed by the Chief Medical Officer, would have provided that technical advice. So there are various opportunities and engagements that allow for the carrying out of the Public Health Act that have come about now with the changes that have been made. And so therefore to say that the non-performance, and we'll talk about the non-performance, has impacted the effectiveness of the Public Health Act, I don't think that that's a fair statement. What the Public Health Act affords us through the Central Health Committee, which we have utilized and utilized very strongly during COVID and subsequent to COVID, is the relationship between the local Board of Health, which is really now represented through, in terms of public health activities, through the Medical Officer of Health and the parish health structure, that direct relationship with the ministry and its ability to seek advice from the Central Health Committee, and for that Central Health Committee to offer advice both to the local board as well to the minister. So during COVID, we would have seen where we did have the formation of a committee which chaired by the Chief Medical Officer that took in all the parish medical officers of health and would have had representatives from the senior technical directorate in the ministry. And we served as the major advisory group in terms of the advisement to the minister on matters related to COVID. Recognizing as well that the majority, over 50% of the members of that group would be members of the Central Health Committee, and also that the Central Health Committee has also its ability to regulate itself and to designate the Chief Medical Officer or the chair or any part of the subcommittee to act, a subcommittee to act on its behalf. So I don't think that we would have impaired in any way the effectiveness of the Public Health Act, but certainly we recognize the role of the Central Health Committee, highlighted through the report, as well as through what happened with COVID, and we will be making moves to strengthen the work of the committee. Thank you.
Member Sibley's?
Chairman.
Oh, 1 second. Yes,
was
member.
Another part of the question.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Lessons learned.
Okay. We recently completed the interaction review from concerning COVID, and certainly it gives us a fair idea of the different areas that we would want to cover in a review. And while I can say that in terms of vector management and manifested through the integrated vector control plan that came about after Zika and chikungunya, we would have highlighted in that plan the areas that we would have found weaknesses and our moves to strengthen the service in terms of being able to deal better with a future outbreak. And of course, this was manifested in dengue, or a dengue response, which we had in 2019. So while I recognize that all the areas of the review that would have made sense were not completed, to say that we had no review at all, the major impact of Zika and chikungunya was in terms of our vector control management, and we would have done significant review, and as I said, that would have been manifested in this plan, which would have shown how we would have made changes to improve the system. Now, coming out of dengue, you would have recognized that we would have gone straight into into COVID. We declared the epidemic for dengue in January 2019, and in January 2020, we would have recognized the WHO declaring COVID-19 a public health emergency of international concern. So there would not have been time for us to do a review in between dengue and COVID. But I must say that we had several lessons learned that we would have gone on to implement in COVID coming out of the dengue or response to the dengue epidemic. And in the interaction review that has been done, these areas again would have been highlighted and the areas that are to be strengthened. For example, the formation of this committee where we had the Chief Medical Officer and the Senior Technical Group working with the parish medical officers of health, that came out of dengue, and it would have been something that we would have utilized during COVID. Also, the fact that we would have recognized during dengue that we had a weakness in terms of our clinical response. We would have recognized, taken that forward in COVID, and our initial mandate was that we would strengthen our clinical response. So we would move to keep the pandemic out of the hospital until we have strengthened our ability to respond at the hospital level. That also came out of our response to dengue. So several lessons were learned. They were not documented, I agree. We did not have time between dengue and COVID, and certainly with the review that is being done now, those would have been documented, and I think that it will make a lot of difference as we move forward.
Member Siblings.
Thank you, Chair. Timo, can you state whether or not you are of the view that with the passage of time and the House of Representatives now since 1962, that the committee is, that the function of the committee is redundant? Would you?
As I said, the Central Health Committee is the opportunity that still exists for the parish level to communicate directly to the minister through the Central Health Committee. So it is a very important part of being able to manage what is happening at the parish level without interference. Because the parish medical officer can seek guidance under the auspices of the Public Health Act through the Central Health Committee without any reference to any other management structure within the parish or the region. And that is a very important part of being able to respond effectively to public health emergencies at the local level.
So in its current form, where it was used to advise the minister or used to advise the government, it should be, the terms of reference then need to be changed to that of which you just spoke to?
Yes. I saw the terms of reference that was put forward in the report. I tried to find through our files a documentation of the approval of that terms of reference. I was not able to do so. However, I do believe that it is timely for us to review these matters. There are, as the Auditor General report would have stated, that there are several public health laws that are in existence or laws that govern how we function in public health, and many of them do need to be reviewed and updated, and the ministry does have an agenda in terms of addressing those matters.
Members, any? Yeah, go ahead.
The auditor's report is punctuated by the 2030 vision in light of the fact that we had COVID and the impact that COVID had.
are you of the view that some of those targets in the 2030 vision need to be revised? And are you also of the view, would you be of the view that an impact analysis should be done in terms of how much COVID has affected the 2030 vision? Because the reality, when I read the Auditor General's performance audit report, and in many of the findings, it points to not being able to achieve the target. I'm wondering if we can achieve the target with regard, as it not in the context that we had COVID-19, and if I don't want us to really be emotional and say no, but that we should do an impact analysis to see how much it has impacted those targets, whether it has impacted those targets by the amount of time we had COVID, and one would remind me that COVID is still happening, but in terms of the pandemic. But how is it that it would affect the target? Is it 2 years, 3 years? And that is what I'm really concerned about.
All right, thank you very much for that question, member. Through you, Chair. So, one of the good things that, and one of the appreciations of this report is the logic model that has been used. So, the logic model of the report is that inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, impact. And the report sought to look at each stage of the different processes to determine whether or not the right inputs led to the right activities, led to the right outputs, led to the right outcomes, and will lead to the right impact. What we have determined from the ministry is that we need to do exactly what you say. We need a midterm review to answer, because what the report is pointing to us is that we need to go back and look at the logic model to see whether or not our inputs are leading to our activities that are leading to our outputs, etc. And so we will be conducting that midterm review, and we will be looking at exactly some of the questions that you're asking. At this point in time, I can't say that we can definitively say yes or definitively say no, because some of these considerations are not the ministry's consideration alone. Another thing that I want to point out about this report, is very important for us to take note of as a record, is that this is not an assessment of the Ministry of Health. Yes, we are here answering the questions, but it is a whole of system report, looking at the entire infrastructure around the resilience of the healthcare system going forward. So it calls into review all the different stakeholders, all the different players in health, right? And so we do understand that Vision for Health 2030 is now, we tabled in 2019, so that we're now at what, 4 or 5 years, going into 5 years. Perhaps there's a review requiring us to look back at some of these indicators and look at the logic model in our implementation towards Vision 2030, and for us to utilize some of the findings that we have here to either tweak or to accelerate or to refocus so that we can achieve the outcomes that we want.
As you mentioned, a whole of system approach, that came to mind when I look at the executive summary number 7, and I was wondering if it's a question, if it's a finding that is for you as PS to really respond to, or is it a finding that is requiring the minister himself to answer this one, where he stated that although government allocation 359 billion between 2016 to 2017 and 2020,
Member Sibley,
2021.
tell me which document you're reading from so I can follow you.
The same document, Chair. This summarize. And it went on to talk about gross domestic product and the percentage that is being, you know, I'm thinking that that is a question for the Minister of Finance or the Minister of Health or the Prime Minister. And I had jotted these very notes to say, I just don't know how would I get these clarification from UPS. So I agree with you that it's really something that really need to be looked at by all the stakeholders.
Member Charles, you have a question? You have to, member guy, you want to just pass the mic. Big Ram, just pass that.
Good morning, everyone. It's a quick question. First of all, I want to tell you that I compliment the ministry and everyone involved in how you handled the pandemic. But I realized that you said that you used some of the lessons learned from 2019 from dengue, even though it was not documented. And it was pretty close because 2019 to 2020. I'm wondering if the lessons that we have learned, even though we're still in COVID, from the pandemic, do you plan to document that for future?
Yes, we have started with the interaction review that was led by PAHO. So two sections of that review have been completed. So we would have just received the document, so the Auditor General would not have had knowledge of this document as yet. But it is, there quite a bit of documentation there of, you know, the responses, the impact of the responses, challenges that were faced, and what to do moving forward. And there is even a timetable in terms of things that we need to achieve over a period. So this is just a preliminary report, and we would have to have further discussion on it, but certainly we have started. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Auditor General.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really don't have much to add to what is said. I just want to put, I believe, two things into context. First is the comment made by the permanent secretary, which I somewhat support with respect to the review of the, I guess, plethora of activities that the ministry is charged with, and doing an assessment to determine how plausible it is really to achieve all of this. And though we make reference to the SDG, that is separate and apart from the National Development Plan, which the goals have not been relaxed. And it is probably timely for the PIOJ now to revisit that document to determine how reasonable it is to achieve what is set out. But there's one thing, and it's basically to the point of the piece, that I really want to highlight, because we're emphasizing COVID as the real culprit behind not achieving or the real setback. But I from the information that I have, the challenges would have beleaguered the Ministry of Health for some time now. It predates the current permanent secretary. And I'm just going to give an example as is set out in the report. The medium-term framework for 2012-2015 of the, I think, 35 activities set out there, the ministry only achieved 2. For 2015-2018, there were 57 activities for that, and I think the ministry only achieved 10. And of course, 2018-2021, I'm not going to touch that because COVID, we know what happened there. But it's not just the pandemic. There are other issues that I believe the ministry really has to pay close attention to. As it pertains to the funding gap that exists, that was mentioned against the backdrop that the World Health Organization actually sets out an indicative, I think it's a GDP ratio, of what the funding should be for the health sector. And of course, we fall short of that. So even though the government has, over the years, increased the allotment to health, it is still below the global expectation and indicator. And I think it is playing out as well in the results that we see here. I want to speak to the matter of the Central Health Committee, which you may not have seen it because that point was not included in the executive summary. It's actually in the body of the report, page 23. Now, yes, I've heard the history, but the fact is that the law is the law, and we're using that as the criteria. And it is against that backdrop that would have been identified as a deficiency. So the Act requires that the Central Health Committee shall advise the Minister of Health and local Board of Health on developments critical to maintaining the health of the population, coordinate the contributions from various regulatory agencies and bodies in improving environmental and public health conditions, monitor the state of public health and provide direction for continuous improvement of public health, co-opt individuals, companies, and organizations for consultation as required, and make proposals, request presentations, or investigations on matters deemed critical to public health and the environment. Besides a letter that was provided, we really don't have any evidence that the committee met, and that is our central point. So there is no evidence that the legally required committee is functioning as it should. As it pertains to the terms of reference, this was provided by the Director of Policy. This is what was submitted to us. So whether it was approved or not, I can't speak to that. But certainly when we asked for the TOR, this is what was provided. And the TOR requires that you should meet at least quarterly or at such time determined by the chairman, develop a prioritized plan of work for each calendar year, produce an annual report, and maintain records and minutes of all meetings and deliberations. So that is what we use as the criteria for assessing the performance around that particular activity. In terms of its continued usefulness, Mr. Chairman, we didn't see any reason to question that, but the ministry, in doing its overall review, well, certainly it would have to result in a change in the, I think it's the Public Health Act of 1980 or 81 that actually makes this a requirement. So those are my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Your member, say please. Talk closer to the mic.
No? Just read from, where it said figure 7, responsibilities of the Central Health Committee. Is this a section of the Act that you read from? Is it, which section of the Act? That's what I'm asking you.
It don't matter.
Because your document doesn't state the section.
That, through you, Mr. Chairman, is coming from the terms of reference of the Central Health Committee of Ministry of Health 2003. It's there in the report.
No, because you said the Act earlier. So. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. And therefore, Chair, it begs the question, with regards to the terms of reference, that document is with the Ministry of Health, and
So if I'm answering, or should
yes,
I?
or
Let me.
Thank you. Okay, so Section 4 of the Public Health Act stipulates that it shall be the function of the Central Health Committee to advise the Minister and the local board on such matters connected with public health as they think fit, and on any aspect of the subject referred to them by the Minister or the local board as the case may be for advice.
Yeah.
Right. So Chairman, as I said, this is for us in the Ministry of Health, not a. The only issue that we took was to say that because it didn't meet, it impacted the role of public health, because there were other mechanisms within the system that allowed us to achieve the same outcome. But we take from the report the importance of the organization or the institution, and we will do our internal assessment, because, as we said, as we move through the different governance structures in public health, there is a need to review the relevance of these different institutions. As I said before, Chairman, we are very conscious of the assessment, and it has provided the ministry, because there are a lot of times we are not able to do this type of retrospective, and it is good that we are able to do this retrospective, and especially on this matter, I believe it is important for us. Not saying that we should be given any sort of allowances, but myself and the CMO are fairly new to this job, not an excuse, but there is going to be some gaps in terms of how we work, and we thank the Auditor General for identifying some of these gaps, and we're going to work towards improving the entire governance structure. As I said before to the member, we will be doing a review of the entire system, and especially in the context of Vision for Health 2030, and we will be looking at the different plans and structures in it. One of the things that we were charged to do, which is something that was identified in the report, is the real problem of the siloed way in which we operate, because we are really 5 ministries of health, working in terms of the regional health authorities having their own autonomy, the Ministry of Health in the center around policy, and does that work for the delivery of healthcare services? It was one of the things that was raised in the PAHO assessment, and it is one of the items in the Vision for Health 2030 that we need to look at. What is the governance structure around health? Is it the best formula that we have for our country, the size and with the different parameters for delivery of healthcare? Whether or not 4 regional health authorities is the best way. We're not saying yes or no. We don't know. We need to look at it and become very pragmatic.
Is there a specific study or assessment being done on that?
We will be doing that assessment. Well, we had proposed to start that assessment this year. I doubt that we'll be able to get to that assessment this year because of the priorities, which you'll hear about tomorrow. But it is the intention in the implementation of Vision for Health 2030 that there will be a review of the entire institutional arrangement for the delivery of healthcare services, because there are several archaic institutions that are in the structure that needs to be brought into contemporary life.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions, members? All right, I defer the minutes. Member Miller had moved for confirmation. Is there someone who can second the minutes? If not, I will Member Sibley's, you can second. Member Sibley's seconds the minutes. Any other matters, members? Okay, let me thank the team from the Ministry of Health, the team from the Auditor General's Department, and the team from the Ministry of Finance. And members, we'll review the outstanding items and come back to you on a date for our next meeting and the matters that will be addressed. Can I have a motion for the adjournment? Member Clark, seconded by Member Chin. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Charles, sorry, I said Clark. Yes, Charles.
How many more must die because of reckless drivers? How fast is too fast? Make we take time, no man. Obey the rules of the road. Drive with care.
Here is a special parenting message brought to you by the National Family Planning Board, 5 Sylvan Avenue, Kingston 5. The way we treat our children directly impacts what they believe about themselves. That was a special parenting message brought to you by the National Family Planning Board, 5 Sylvan Avenue, Kingston 5.
Once you come to our domestic violence center, you will be greeted with a pleasant face, because what we do, we are about caring for persons, and we're also about empathizing with persons. So when you come, you have an environment that you are comfortable in, and that you'll be free to express yourselves and to seek the intervention that you desire, and we provide that avenue for you to come. It's a safe haven for you. Once you are with us in our center, you are protected. And so you can rest assured that we will act on your behalf and act in your best interest.
The center, it's a place, it's an environment where you can be comfortable. You can, when you come here, you're supposed to feel relaxed. So whatever the issue is, we're not saying that we are miracle workers, but what we're saying is that we are persons that are open to listening to you, accommodating you. We believe in confidentiality, and therefore whatever is said here is kept here.
Jamaica, home of the resilient, passionate and hard-working. A people and a nation who have achieved and defied all odds, working to keep their economy growing, their country thriving, from investments made in innovative opportunities and exports demanded globally. We have a vision, now within our grasp, where Jamaica becomes the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. We will not let go of this vision. We will grow. We will overcome these challenging times and look to the future with hope and positivity.